hold up, my dear.
Okay, this is a fun one. This is a new track, been released already by Ray and the Carolina Catfish. Love this band. Met them way back in the day when I used to do live sound. Ran a bunch of shows front of house for these guys. Become really good friends. I did their last full length. I believe it was called self-titled. Just Jesse Ray and the Carolina Catfish. We did a live performance way back in the day, which is pretty cool. And recorded that on my old console, and Allen and Heath System 8, I think it was called. Cool board. But this is the most recent. We tracked this in March of 23. The drummer that plays in my band, Tiny Tree, Paul Jensen, started playing drums with Jesse Ray and the Carolina Catfish. And one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted the identity of Paul's drums to be slightly different than what we use on Tiny Tree Records. So I had him use my house kit. So he used my Indie stainless steel, I think it's a 14x8 snare, and then the drums are Gretsch Renown drums. We used a 12-inch rack, 16-inch floor, used all of his cymbals. The kick drum, I think, is a 22 by, I don't know drum sizes that well. 22 by 16, 18, whatever is pretty common size. And had a lot of fun with this. So we're gonna go through it. Let's start with my master bus. Using the Fusion drive. If you've seen any other videos, I have set this on here and I just mix into it. Violet EQ, I did end up using the fat switch on this one. Then my successor, I pretty much leave it at the same settings every single time, same threshold, 3-to-1 ratio, 2 attack, I think it's in milliseconds on the Heritage successor, and then the quickest release. Shadow Hills, I'm using this just for the sound of the circuit. And then the SPL Iron, I'm using this primarily for the air bass, and then I'm using this to drive my console. If you've seen any of the other videos, I talk about how I take the output, I use Antelope converters. I've got the Orion 32, which I absolutely love, really great sounding converters. I take the output of that, I send it into, I've got a return section on my TAC Scorpion, which I've hot rodded to Kingdom Come. Maybe I'll do a video on all the mods I've done to that. And I've got basically a DC coupled return path into my master bus, which I have the Cappy ACA summing booster in there, which has the 2520 op amps and their transformers. So depending on how hard I drive the output of my session, it'll change. Like when you drive transformers, what I notice is the sides get more energy, specifically guitar, because guitar usually lives on the sides. The center image tucks into place, and it's just really cool. And then I usually audition a limiter, the L1 limiter. I love it, to just see where I would be living at when I master. And I ended up actually mastering this record, so maybe I'll go through and walk through how I mastered for both digital release and for vinyl release. We'll make another video for that. So I'm just going to shut everything off on the drums. And if you've seen any of the other videos, there are some consistent things that I do. Let's see here. Did I really not? record on the in? Oh, I did. Okay. All right. So let me pull all these up and I'll just walk through how I did everything on the drums. All right. So, I recorded a hat mic. It's a new one for me. Let's start with the rooms. So I printed these on separate tracks. A lot of times I'll record them as a stereo pair, but I see why they're on different inputs. Sometimes my console has its own thoughts and feelings on how things should work that day, so I have to move things around on the channels. So recording on the input, tape. Tape. I love the way drums sound when they hit tape, and I absolutely love the way the tape face sounds. When they first released it, I actually bought the tape face from Kiev, and this is that. The cool thing is when Plugin Alliance took on and released the tape face, you get different tape choices, and you can go all the way up to 30 IPS, which is cool. So here is the room sound, no processing, just live in the space. Next up, overheads. I used the Warm Audio 84s. Love them. As you can see here, I've got a channel strip on these. Doesn't look like I'm doing anything. Just want the color of the API. Same thing, tape face. So when I set up the session, I just basically drag, go plop, 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 all the way down the drums. So I build the sound of the drums on the console first, balance everything out, decide if I need to move any microphones, get the tone where we need it to be, and then do any equalization I need to on the console, and then I switch to monitoring off the session, and that's when I can hear what the drums sound like with tape, and I can do some equalization off of that. So here are the overheads. Super clean, super clear. I love the way that these sound. Oh, you can actually see my microphone plugged in my board, monitoring off of that. Kick drum, I did the AKG D112, and then I think I used FET 47 in front. It may have been the AKG, like I think it's a Perception 80. I could have used one of those two. I don't know what I used. So here's the two of the mics together, and then we'll solo them out. So here's the kick drum mic in front. I think I had this about 3 or 4 feet in front of it, about at the top of the kick drum, angled towards the face of the kick drum. And I landed at that. I think I had it up against the kick drum initially, and there just wasn't enough boom to it. So I moved it off and was really quite pleased at how it sounded, the way the kick drum opened up. So I ran with it. Oh, looks like I have some processing on there. Let me shut that off. So here's the front kick mic. It's nice bloom to it. And then here is the close mic. And I like to start with the AKG D112 mic on kick. It has a very neutral sound, in my opinion. The frequency response is fairly flat-ish. the high end isn't excited, the low end isn't really excited. So it kind of gives me a good starting point. And sometimes I really prefer the way that microphone sounds. If I need to exaggerate it, then I will use a Audix D6 or even a Beta 52 by Shure to get more attack out of the kick, something that's suitable for the sound of the kick drum. So here's the two mics together with no processing. There we go. Then we got snare. So snare, I actually I used a 57 and I used a Rode M2. I really like those mics. You can get these mics really inexpensively. I bought them way back in the day when I needed a nice set of overheads, and I used them for a really, really long time. And then as my tastes have gotten pickier, what really started my adventure looking for a different set of overheads was I'm a really big fan of Kurt Ballou and the way his records sound, and his cymbals sound amazing. I can't remember what record of his I was listening to that he recorded and mixed, but the cymbals had so much body to them that I wanted that. So I picked up the Warm Audio 84 mics, and I've been using those ever since. I think I got them about a year and a half ago, and I have just been loving them. There's so much detail. There's nice weight to them. The way the smack on the snare and toms all sound really great together. But for Paul's snare drum, I wanted to have the weight that a 57 uses, or the way the 57 sounds. The 57, in my opinion, sounds a little bit darker. And then it has great mid-range, and then it has like decent low end for snare drum. So I wanted to have that, but then I also wanted to have a lot of detail in his snare to complement the bottom microphone, which I use every single time. The GT44, it's a Groove Tubes, small diaphragm condenser. It's a tube mic. I have used that as the undersnare mic for probably the last 3 or 4 years. I love the way it sounds. I use the supercardioid capsule. There's an omnicardioid and supercardioid option that I can switch them out, but I typically favor the supercardioid so I can get some kick rejection. So here's the 3 mics together, then we'll go through and solo them. And as you can hear on this song, it's a gentler song. Paul used hot rods, and we all agree between me, Jesse, and Paul that those just really made the snare and cymbal sound awesome. So here's a 57. Oh, I've got processing on it. Pretty quiet. The M2. And then the undersnare mic. And then last we'll do toms. I don't think he plays toms once in this song. So we'll listen to those, and then we'll start listening to how everything sounds with processing on. So toms. And I cut the toms out. The way I cut toms is I get right up on the hit, and then I want to cut the decay off before either a cymbal hit comes in or the next hit comes in, so that I'm just getting the attack on the direct mic, and then I'm relying upon the room mics, and the overheads to handle some of the decay. If I'm really, really picky, I'll bring in a sample. I didn't use any samples on this session because the type of music that Jesse plays is very organic, and so I just made sure that I captured things well, and we ran with it. It's not uncommon for him to work with another studio in the area that is completely analog. They have a 2-inch MCI tape machine, and he'll do records there, and it's called the Goon Lagoon, and the records that come out of the Goon Lagoon are always amazing. Tommy Schnichtel is an outstanding engineer, and the records Jesse's done in the past all sound absolutely incredible. So, all right, so we'll start with the drum bus. I'm using the SiQ, and you can see this is pretty common for me. Up, up. Looks like I didn't turn the highs up all the way. And then I got the drive on. Looks like I opted for the X stressor, the distressor on the drum bus. And then one of the things I absolutely love is the buses that Plug-in Alliance has modeled for both. They have them for, I think, just about every single channel strip they make. But I toggle between the Neve and the API if I want to get a little bit of that color of the sound of either the Neve amps or the API amps, and I'm sure they're transformer coupled in the modeling. What I've found with the buses is there's really subtle sound shaping where if, like, let's say guitars, for instance. I remember one time I was doing a heavier record and I wanted to bring the guitars forward just a little bit. I strapped on the API bus, and there was just enough of the mid-range that came through that just kind of pushed them forward a little bit, like they're just kind of leaning in just a smidge. So I will pull these out if I just need to take it just a little bit further. So here is the drums, and then I'll bring the stuff in. So there's the drums as a whole, and we'll go over this this dirt channel here in a second. So I'm going to shut all these off. So hats, what do I have on the hats? I've just got some shaping EQ, and it looks like I'm driving the hats a little bit. And it looks like I might be using the expander. I love the way expanders sound over gates on drums a lot, especially if I'm tracking, because I can keep a little bit of that bleed. Sometimes gates feel really aggressive, and they can be challenging to dial in and commit depending on the dynamics of the music, where with an expander I've found that I can fine-tune that sound a little bit better to where I can knock the sound down in between, and then when it opens up it just sounds a little bit more musical to me. See, we got the ride, doing some similar shaping, cutting out a little bit of the boxiness, opening up a little top end, high passing. So here we can listen to the ride because Paul's playing the ride here. Here's the ride with and without. I'm not using much of it, looks like. The rooms, I didn't do anything individually. I treated them globally, and it looks like I just used the distressor. So here's with and without. And something I want to point out on this is I remember when we were doing this, I kept the drums really dry. I didn't use any reverb, as you notice. Like typically up here I'll have a reverb, but the drums for this record sounded nicer to me, pretty dry. And I also monoed the rooms. These are a stereo pair, and when I space my stereo pair out, I measure them off first, and I kind of split the difference between the snare and the kick drum distance to keep the snare and kick as much as I can centered in the image. So when it hits, it doesn't feel like the snare or the kick are pulling to the left or the right. But I ended up monoing them and then balancing them out. So that's the two of them together. And with room mics, I really like to get the decay, to give the drums a sense of depth. We get the attack from the microphones that are directly on each drum, but the rooms help give that snare, kick, tom, cymbals. It gives them a sense of depth. And on here, it looks like I'm doing a slower attack, quick release, so that the compressor is going to let go pretty quickly, so we can just get that nice bloom on cymbals, snare, kick, so on. And then it looks like I'm doing a little bit of a sidechain on there so that the kick drum's not grabbing as much. Overheads, same thing. I'm not doing any processing on each individual track, but I'm treating them globally. And it's just a high pass. So here we go. We'll listen to With and Without. And that is only there just to take a little bit of that kick drum out of the overheads. All right, so kick drum, I've got some processing on the individual mics, and then I have some global processing. So global processing, once again, I'm using the distressor. Love the way the distressor sounds on kick drum. And I think there's a good chance that when I did this record, I had just gotten this through Plugin Alliance, and so I was just eager to use it. So I started using it everywhere. That's not uncommon to me to be excited about something, and it does something really cool, and I just latch onto it. Kick drum, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. On gentler music or less aggressive music, I tend to favor the attack on the kick drum lower. Anywhere in this range from 500 to 1K, it gives it kind of more of an old school sound, like a thunkiness versus a clickiness. And so we tuned this kick drum, I tuned it just a little bit lower so that it would just have more of a boom and less of a thunk. Like I used the same drum set on Best Noodles in Town, and we tuned the kick drum a little bit higher, so it had more of an attack. And I believe, because I bought this drum set from the drummer of the band, American Cheese, we used the kick, snare, and toms, or the kick and toms rather, from this drum set. So I was really familiar with this drum set, and that was one of the big reasons when Leo offered them for sale that I wanted them, is I had tracked them before, and I really liked the way that they sounded. And I specifically loved the way the kick drum sounded, so I wanted to have that here in-house. So let's shut these off, and we'll listen to the kick together. Fantastic. It just cleans it up nicely. Kick in, I'm only using this gate, and you probably see me use this a ton. I finally bought this. I follow a producer engineer named Greg Wells on Instagram, and he had a post about how this thing was just outstanding. If you're working with live drums, this is the gate. And so I was like, you know what? It was on sale. I bought it, and I've loved it ever since. So here's the front mic. And the beautiful thing about this is we can keep that decay. There's been, I've purchased several plugins that have been released where the theory is you let the initial attack come through, and then the decay, you can pick which frequency comes through. The way this would be done in the past is literally automation. Put re-EQ or some parametric EQ on the channel, and then you automate having the attack come through, and then you just have like the low pass go sweep down. So you let the the sustaining low end of each drum ring, but this has it built in, which is just delightful. Close mic, I'm using the gate again, and I'm having a longer decay time on that. And then I'm using the this is it's a Pultec. Let's see what I'm doing on here. Looks like I'm boosting some 10K, and then I'm cutting at 20K just to get the attack just right. So let's listen to before and after. And then if we listen to them both together, super, super nice kick drum sound. I really, really like the way that turned out. Snare drum, we can see here I've got the direct mic turned down. This song is a little bit gentler. So I leaned into the overheads for the snare sound. So we're turning it down negative 7.54. So let's listen to all the stuff together, and then you can see this is not uncommon for me. If I'm not using a sample, I do like the attack that a sample will bring. The Transient Designer, in my opinion, does a nice job of bringing that attack that's like a sample, and so it brings that smack out, but then I can just fine tune how that smack is before it goes to compression. So it's like, in my head, it's kind of like I'm recreating the attack that a sample would have into the compression. And once again, the Pensado snare is an outstanding starting point. And then I fine tune the threshold to get the transient through. We'll talk about this compressor in a second. And then again, I'm using the bus. And sometimes I'll use the same bus throughout to see if, or not to see, to recreate, like if I were mixing through that console and I was summing each of these channels through that console, to add some kind of a cohesiveness, in a sense. So let's listen to all the snare mics together, and I'll start bringing stuff in. Nothing crazy. The thing I love about the way SSL compressors work, they have a really nice sound, in my opinion, for a snare drum. Snare top, I'm just toning down a little bit of that ring, and then I'm giving a little bit of EQ. The thing I like about this is you can put Unity on, you can drive the preamp to break it up just a little bit. Looks like I'm only adding 220 to give a little bit of weight, and then I'm high passing at 45, and I doubt that this is even grabbing. Let's see. Barely. I'm not using much of that 57. I'm just using a little bit in there to fatten the snare drum up. The M2, same thing, just softening that ring. And I really like this plugin. It's not heavy-handed. It's very gentle. You can get heavy-handed with it, but it's really, really handy if you just need to focus on a certain section to soften something up, or just like tuck something in really easily. And then I've got the Neve on this one. Same thing, I'm driving it a little bit. I'm brightening it up a little bit. I've got some 4.8K, and then I've got some 10K, and then I'm using a lot of 220, and then I'm high passing at 45. And a lot of these decisions on where the high pass comes in is two things. The how much kick is bleeding into that microphone, and then controlling the weight of the snare. And so I'll fine tune this the high pass frequency depending on how it reacts with this, because something kind of cool I've done on instruments in the past where it's like I want a really low deep sound is maybe I would boost like 35 and I'd do a ton of it, but then I would high pass it like 70 or 160 to where it's like I'm getting a lot of that weight, but then I'm controlling how much of it is bleeding through. So that's my thinking on that stuff. But here, let's listen to this. And you can hear how that's reacting with the transient designer. See how it gives it that poke, makes that snare stick out a little bit. I like that. Because it's a little bit lower in the mix, I'm using the overheads to get the snare sound, and I just want that snap to still be in that microphone. Bottom drum strip, using the under snare ringy. It's a very common one for me. I like the way it sounds. Looks like I have a gate on that one too. Cool. And then here's all of them together. Cool. Snare drum. Toms. Let me see what I did on these. Rack. I'm using a Neve EQ. Driving it a little bit. High passing. So right here, perfect example. High passing it at 160. But to keep some of that weight of that tom, I'm boosting 60. Adding a little bit of attack at 4.8K and then 10K to brighten those up. And then floor tom, high pass at 45, low pass may have been too bright. And then I try and shape these to where like I'll listen to the drums together. And a lot of times when I am, dialing in the drum sounds, I picked this up from a buddy of mine. For sound checking drums, instead of listening to every drum individually, have the drummer play drums. And it works out way better to sound check drums because then you can hear the entire kit together. And then I'll just audition every microphone towards like I'll start making a balance of the kit on the console and hear what everything sounds like, and then move mics as needed, and then apply any equalization to those. And then depending on my mood, I'll start patching in some outboard gear to do stuff, and away we go. So probably doing a lot of this just to balance the tone of those together. And then I'm using the Fusion to add some more weight. This fat button is really delightful. High passing at 50, bumping at 90. Looks like we're doing 3.6. And then no brightness on there. And then I'm using the distressor, and I'm using the limiter just to keep them glued when Paul goes through a fill. So we'll just jump right into it. So we'll go nothing, this, and then we'll just start bringing stuff in. So just loop this section. And I'm keeping them pretty tight, 40, 51. So now we can listen to all the drums together with all the processing, and then we'll talk about this dirt and then that compressor on the snare that was back a little bit. So here we go. Love the way those drums sound. Paul is also an outstanding player, so he does a really nice job of playing for the song, and then that's a big piece of recording is we can't make something that doesn't exist, and so when something sounds great, it really does start at the source. The person playing the music. It makes a huge difference on the sound of the way he's able to pull the sound out of the instrument, the drums, the way he hits the cymbals, the toms, the snare, the kick. All of those things are crucial for getting a good drum sound. So when you hear a record that has amazing drum sounds, 99.999% of the time, it is that drummer is the biggest reason of why they sound good. So let's talk about this dirt track. They're one of the biggest influences for this record was a guy, I think his name is R.L. Burnside, and he has one record, I think it was released in the early 90s, and it sounds like it was tracked all in the same room, but it has a grittiness, a rawness to it, and the whole record just sounds incredible. Like, it's so much fun to listen to, but it had this dirtiness to it that both Paul, Jesse, and myself really liked, and we wanted to bring a little bit of that into this record. So I created a distortion, and I'm using a loop trotter, and I fine-tune this, and then I'm using the distressor to help keep it tight. So I'm bringing in, I'm adding, I'm adding some ride, some kick, and some snare, just to keep some of that dirtiness. There's a lot of ride in this record, so we wanted to have a little bit of that dirtiness in there. So that's what this is. So let's just play a section. Adds a little bit of flavor to it. So I'm going to mute this and I'll bring it back in. It's really cool how the snare really comes to life, and then that kick gets a little bit of the rattiness to it, and then that ride coming through is really neat. So on the snare track, I have this compressor here, and the function of this compressor is it is being side chained off of the rack tom. And when I was doing their last record, I was having an issue positioning the rack tom in the stereo field. Every time I would shift the rack tom to the left, it still sounded like it was coming through the center. And I realized that the rack tom was, it's bleeding into the snare mic, and that snare mic was basically holding it down to the center because the snare mic was more dominant in volume. And so I was like, oh, well, if I duck it out of the way, then I can get the attack from the rack tom to be where I want it to be in the stereo field. So this rack tom, I've got it coming over the entire snare bus. So we can listen how it just ducks it out of the way. It just pushes it out of the way. And if we bypass it, again. So now if we bring the tom in, this is without the compressor, and then we put it in, it helps glue that tom down to where it needs to be in the stereo field. And I use that often to help, since I really prefer using live drums and then augmenting things with samples as needed. Why is my drum still on? Okay. What am I soloing? Nothing. Okay, so now we got bass guitar. Bass. I played bass on this song. And we used. I've got a bass here. It's an old one. I think it's called. What is it called? Mustang. I don't know. Looks really cool. Sounds really cool. And we did not use an amplifier. We just ran this straight into the console via a Rupert Neve DI box. And we Jesse tracked bass on half the songs, and I tracked bass on the other songs. And I don't understand why. There we go. And he had the tone rolled all the way off on the bass, and coming through the console, we just plugged it in, and we all really liked the sound, so we just went with it. So this is what the bass sounds like, just straight in. And when I played this song, and this is something I've noticed with tracking bass, the better bass sounds come from a bass player that is very consistent. There is a chance I may have had my 1176 part of the signal chain, but I can't remember. I didn't have any notes. Is the consistency. If you can see, my transients are incredibly consistent, and I try and play when I'm playing, bass, because bass is so important. Is really listen to the music, and like on this, when I was tracking bass for these songs, is I didn't want to be heard, so I made sure that the way that I played each note was blending in with Jesse's guitar and drums. So I purposely played this so that I wanted my hits super consistent and even, so nothing stuck out. And then trying to blend myself in. I'm trying to mix myself while I'm tracking it. And the better bass players that I've worked with do that naturally. Their right hand is very consistent. The way that they play through things, be it, if they're very even on fingers. There's a lot of people that will play with fingers that are very inconsistent. They'll hit strings harder depending on if it's their pointer finger or middle finger, and they'll be all over the place, and it'll make for a very inconsistent take. And then there's people that play with pick. A lot of times the pick players are a lot more even because they're doing that same attack with how they play with their hand. And it's very challenging to mix the bass to where it's going to sit nicely in the mix if the way the person is playing bass is all over the place with how intense each one of their hits are. So that's something to keep in mind if you're tracking someone that's playing bass. Observe how they're playing the bass. If they're playing a pick, are they playing it evenly? If they're playing with fingers, are their fingers playing evenly? Is the position to where their hand is, between the bridge and the neck? All those things play a huge part in how that tone is going to sit in the mix. Because outside of retracking a bass, it's very, 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 very hard to try and fix all of those things, because the high end's going to come through a little bit differently. The way the low end blooms is going to be a lot different. And it makes it very tough to use tools to shape that bass sound. So bass to me is one of the most challenging instruments and the most overlooked instruments. A lot of times people are like, oh, it's just bass. But if the bass isn't played well, a track won't glue. It's all over the place, and then I won't be able to use the bass as high in the mix. Because something that I've learned, and it definitely plays into my personal taste, is having the bass more forward in a mix makes guitars and drums sound bigger, makes the mix sound bigger. And I like having the bass more forward because I like really big sounding mixes. So we tracked for continuity. We tracked through, I use a tape face. I've got some shaping EQ. The bass, Jesse doesn't like the bass to really be heard, because it's just guitar, vocals, drums, live. There's no bass. So it was very important that the bass it's felt but not really heard. It's there but not there. And that's just the way Jesse likes his music. And then I'm just using a compressor, LA2A, and this little knob here, if I remember correctly, plays into how much low-end information sneaks through the compressor. And so I actually, for the first time, I usually just roll this all the way up, let it ride, let the low end breathe a little bit. And then, of course, again, to have some continuity in sound, I put the Neve bus on. So let's listen to the bass, and I'll start bringing stuff in. I'm using a low boost there. And when I was tracking this, I tried to compress myself in a way where the way I was hitting the notes on the bass, and I did use my fingers when I played this. I wanted to be able to control the attack. I wanted to be able to control the attack. I wanted to be able to control the bloom of the notes. So I really paid attention to how I was hitting each note so that it wasn't sticking out. A compressor is a delightful tool, but it can't fix poor playing. So I was very mindful, of how I was playing that. Let's hear the bass and drums together. They fuse really nicely. And actually, before we do that, I just want to talk about this shaping EQ and why. I will EQ the bass the opposite direction of how I will EQ kick drums so I can fuse them together. So giving myself some low end, taking out some area so that bloom of the kick drum is not being interfered with by the kick drum, because the two will fuse together. That low end is still going to be there, and that kick drum is going to occupy all that low end. So I'm not going to use it in the bass guitar. I'm going to give that kick drum space. And then I'm taking some of the 100 out, where this looks actually more like this is 200, we'll say 110, 120. I'm poking a little bit of that back through, because on bass guitar, to me, that frequency actually sounds nice. It helps fatten up the guitars a little bit, and then, it just adds a little bit of weight. And this song, I think, was played in standard, and I think a low E, is 86 hertz or something like that. So playing into that, we're starting to get some of the actual resonances of the notes played. I could be way off base here, but let's see. Drums and bass together. See, we've got bass and we're not interfering with the kick drum at all, so we're getting a nice cohesive sound together. So guitar was a lot of fun. Since Jesse is a guitar player, and he wanted to keep this as true to live as possible, we did no guitar overdubs. There is one guitar track playing the entire time, one bass track, one drum track, one vocal track. I think we may have harmonized one spot in the whole record. But the way I tracked this is I have my direct mic, which is actually, I think I used this microphone that I'm talking into, FET47, in front, and he was using a Mojo Tone 1x12 amp that sounded really great with his guitar. And he uses really cool guitar pickups. I think they might be like Dynasonics or something like that. And so we went back and forth between bridge, middle, and neck. And I think a lot of the record we landed on the bridge pickup just because it sounded so nice. So so I took the Fat 47 on the front of the cab. I used a 57 on the back of the cab, and then the same close rooms inside the room microphones I used for the drums. I used those, and then did I use a far room for the drums? I did not. And then I had a far room. I know I had it going for the drums. Maybe I just didn't use it. Let me see if I got it in here. Maybe not. God, I really didn't think I mic'd the hi-hat. Now I'm kind of curious. I'm going to pull this and turn it up. Sounds like I may have. Okay. It's very rare for me to mic the hi-hat. All right. So back to guitar. So let's talk about this some more. So my thinking behind the guitar is we want to have lots of depth. We have a single instrument here, so the guitar needs to be massive, especially on the more rocking tracks. So by having the front and back of the speaker mic'd, and so I have them up on the console, and I sum them through one of the buses on my console, and then I pipe that right into my converters. So I did these together. The close rooms. This EQ worked out really great for Jesse. Then we're using some Kramer tape. Kramer tape is a really neat sounding tape machine. The way I have found this one is it has a lot of personality to it. So I got to pick and choose the spots I use it, but when I use it, it's really cool. Stereo controller, it looks like I'm widening those rooms. And then the far room, which I know for a fact it was just an AKG Perception 80, I think is what it's called. And I have this, it's probably about 25, 30 feet away from the guitar, pointing away from the guitar, so I'm catching the reflections off the back of the room. So let's listen to some guitar with nothing and then with everything. So here's all of them together with no processing. Sounds awesome. Sounds like his guitar. Sounds like you're in the room with his guitar. I really like that. I absolutely love air around instruments, drums, guitar, vocal. Love it. So direct guitar. Let's listen to that soloed and then with processing. So I'm using saturator. Looks like I'm doing pretty light stuff with it. And then I think this is a Helios EQ. What's really neat is if you don't even move the bass up or down and you pick the frequency here, you'll feel resonances of that frequency. So if it's on 0, it's just flat, but if you just flick it to 60, 120, 250, you'll start to sense that low end coming into play. So I'll show you what I mean. And then I'm adding a little bit of mid-range, and then I'm adding some high end, which is 10K. So we'll bring that in. You hear how that just came to life when that 60 came on? Just opened that low end up really nicely. The close rooms. So I'm repeating that. A lot of times this is not uncommon for me to where I will bring an EQ in and absolutely love the way it's doing stuff on something, and then I'll just keep using it. I'll be like, this is great, and then I will just lean into an equalizer for that session. I'm like, this is the one. Boom, 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 boom. Stereo tape or Kramer tape, stereo one, and then this is just for some body, and then stereo control, and I'm widening. So we're gonna start bringing stuff in. So here's the room mics. So I'm opening that 60 up just to give some more weight to the guitar. I'm hitting this just for body. Turn it up a little bit too. So I want to point something out on this. I did this on his last record too, and I'll actually do this on bands that prefer to only have one guitar. So if it's a bass, guitar, drums, vocals band and they want to only do one guitar, I will use the direct mic on the left. So you can see we're doing 35 left, and I try and find the spot to where it's enough out of the way of the drums and vocal, but still sounds punchy, and close enough to the center to where the mono image collapses nicely. So that's how I landed on 35. And then with the room mics, you can see right here, I'm pushing them to the right. So that way we got the direct sound on the left, and then the decay and body of the room sound on the right. So it gives a stereo image that is really cool. So if we hear these together, you can see how that is. Really cool. And then the far room, let's see here. Let's pull it up. It looks like I took this off, but sometimes I will actually reposition the distance that microphone is away from the cab by doing some time adjustment. So this one looks like I'm adding additional time. So basically moving that microphone further away based on where it's at. I'm using the twin tube to give that microphone some more body. And then repeat. Like I said, if I find an EQ and I love it, I use it. Opening up the low end, bringing up some of the high end on the guitar. This is something that I've used a lot when I'm doing guitar in this way. Even if there's multiple guitars, I will not brighten the direct mic up because it gets too fizzy or bitey, but I'll brighten the rooms up. And then that sound will just blend together with that direct mic to where it's like we have nice mid-range coming from the guitar, but then all of a sudden you have that bite coming from the rooms, and then those rooms just start to come to life. And that adds into that air and that body of the instrument. So let's listen to these off that far room. So this is nothing. Really cool. And another thing which is neat too is, you know, I ran live sound for a lot of years, and I love the experience that you get when you see a band live, and I try and bring a little bit of that into a recording too, to where when you're standing at the back of the room and you hear a guitar coming off the stage, there is that bitiness, that guitar sound opens up and you get that directness of the instrument. It's really cool. And so this is a good way in my mind that fuses the two of them together. All right, let's see where I left off here. Just had a phone call. All right, looks like we're on to the global processing of guitar. All right, so what do we got here? We got just some shaping EQ, leaving space for low end for bass guitar, kick drum, taking off a little bit of that top end. Very beneficial on guitar. It helps make some room for cymbals and the top end on vocal, and then just tones down a little bit of the bitiness that can happen in guitar. Black box. Love this on guitar. Just adds body weight. Sometimes I use this to bring the volume up too if it's quiet. Otherwise, I'll just kind of finagle this to have it as at unity. When you saturate guitars or saturate anything, saturation brings up the RMS volume of the sound, and because it's clipping it, if you think about a sine wave, you've got nice smooth lines. Up and down, up and down, up and down, a nice little squiggly. And when you saturate it, that top squares off. So anything in those valleys, that sound is going to get louder. And one thing I've learned over the years is, when I would listen to my mixes back in the day, is like, why do my mixes sound so flat and lifeless and quiet? Saturation is a big piece of that, and that goes hand in hand with the microphones I'm using, and then also like my mic pre's. Like I've modified my console to have a mix of different mic amps in the actual mic pre, transformer coupling, transformer saturate. When that transformer saturates, there's so much magnetic flux that can be saturated into that core, so you start getting organic phase shifts in the high end and low end, and it starts compressing that sound and clipping it, which is pleasing to our ear. And then, I have, my channels are all DC coupled now. So it's like I have capacitorless channels, which make the sound so much cleaner and more open, which gives me so much more room to make it dirty later or manipulate the sound. So black box, great tool. Tape. I absolutely love tape on instruments. Tape has a great way of like softening the transient in a way that makes the instrument feel less direct and almost like puts it into the mix. And you'll hear that, like the way in my head I call it like a smush and spread, because like if you have a direct guitar, let's say like Jesse's guitar is at 35 left, it takes that direct like pointiness of the guitar from that mid-range, and hitting tape. These emulations do such a wonderful job that tape is absorbing that transient, and it's just kind of like smearing it just a little bit to where it gives that guitar depth, and it makes it to where it's like all of a sudden you're like, man, everything just feels so like all over the place, and like a mix that may or may not feel glued. Adding tape can be that thing that sometimes glues something together because of the way things react. LA3A, great compressor. I love using it on a guitar. And glue also has an organic, just the sound of the circuitry. The mid-range comes forward a little bit. And then sometimes I also use this just to bring the volume up. And then, a big piece of, me mixing is like I'm mixing this through my console. I'm only using, the stereo left-right mix, but I will drive things a little bit harder. I'm not bringing everything in, for what I'm turning up, I'm turning it back down to where if I'm mixing exclusively in the box, which I don't do, I've got a little bit more liberty because I'm hearing the sound of the console, and so are you. Like the sound that you're hearing is coming right off the 2 bus of my console, right back into the computer. So you're hearing the sound of my console, and you can hear the way things get saturated. And we'll actually, once we get going, I'll show you how that transformer saturation actually sounds. And then once again, I've got the Neve bus in here just to, tie everything together, like I'm actually mixing through the console. So here's all the guitars together. I'm gonna start bringing stuff in. Let's do this one again. Listen. Did you hear how that guitar just kind of like tucked? Really cool. I just wanted to bring that up. It's just really great. And then on this one, I remember finagling the input and output level so that I wasn't driving the circuitry that they modeled in this too much, where there was too much breakup on the guitar. I wanted to preserve that tone that I tracked because we arrived at that sound, and I didn't want to mess with it too much. I want to enhance those things. It's like I've gotten to the point now where I feel incredibly confident in tracking and able to capture the sound really well. I'm trying not to mess up something that's great, because in the past I would go plug-in fever, and then I would be like, man, I just feel like I can't get it to where I want to go, and I take all the plugins off, and I was like, man, my track mix sounds way better than the mix I have going, and I start over. I remember one time a record, this was a Tiny Tree record, I think it was 11, I was just going down that rabbit hole of adding more plugins to fix this, and I stripped everything off, and I was like, this sounds way better. And then I ended up mixing the whole record just using the API channel strip on every channel, and that was it. And I was like, sounds great. All right, let's keep going. So let's add the LA3 in. Not a crazy change. It's really about just bringing the sound together. Jesse's such an outstanding guitar player that it's really easy. He makes me look good, honestly. At the end of the day, that's what happens. Outstanding musician, tracked well, then I don't have to do much. For vocals, this is actually an interesting story. So we did the first tracking session. I have a tube-based Warm 47. We tracked everything through there, and we're like, this sounds really cool. But he's such a powerful singer, the mic was breaking up. And we were listening to the mix, and he and I both were kind of like, I brought up to him, I was like, hey, would you want to retrack the vocals? I said, I feel like the vocals are just a little too distorted. And he goes, I'm really glad you brought that up. He's just like, I want to retrack the vocals. And so we ended up switching over to this microphone I'm talking on, which is the FET 47 through Warm, and this microphone fit his voice much better. And so that was a big learning thing for me, where hearing and really taking the time to audition microphones on the vocalist to make sure I'm getting the right microphone for their voice. And the other thing that's really nice about this microphone is it can handle loud sources. So when he gets to a spot where he's singing very powerfully, this microphone is not going to break up. It stays very smooth, stays very clear. I'll even use this for screaming vocals, heavy vocals. And it sounds great. And I love the way a 47 pattern sounds on heavy vocals, because it has good clarity and good weight, and it gives me the freedom to put that vocal in place later down the road. So we're going to listen to the vocal naked and then with everything on. So let's let's listen to the plain vocal, and then I'll talk about the vocal chain and so on.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time.
So when we tracked this, I have a compressor. Let me see what it's called. It's a Volumax 4300 made by CBS Laboratories. It's actually an AM limiter for AM broadcast. It's a really neat compressor. And what I do often with this is I found when I was tracking my own vocals is that if I patch this in, even if I don't compress with it, the circuitry in that compressor naturally softens the high end. And so I have another set there, I think the Warm 47 Juniors, which I used in the past for my own vocal. When I patched that in, I was like, oh my gosh, this softened that high end so nicely. And so I know for a fact that we used that, and I think I may have had the 1176 in there too. Having that bluey, when I track my own vocals, I did a song for my band Tiny Tree called Adderall, and that was the first song that I tracked with the Tube 47 from Warm into the bluey compressor. And as soon as I heard those two things together, it just had that familiar sound that we've heard over and over and over and over again on records. I was like, oh my gosh, this has that sound. And that microphone works on my voice really well. And the way it breaks up, I've learned how to play with that microphone so that I can lean into that breakup and then back off on that breakup to get it to to that spot that is really nice. So starting from the ground up, I'll talk about why I chose things. So Decapitator, I'm using this for some color shaping. So softening the high end, bringing some of the tone down so it's a little bit darker, cutting a little low end out, and then giving them it a little bit of a hair. So let's listen to With and Without. Here's what.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time.
Yeah, you can hear how much body it adds, and I believe this is the All-Tech. And then I'm using this True Iron just as a little bit more coloring. In my mind, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, if I was running this through a board more and more and more, it's like you're going to hit several stages of amplifier chips, transformers, so on and so forth. So it's just adding little things to excite different harmonics, all those little nuances that's just going to help make that vocal sound cool. So this is Without.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time.
It's very subtle, but you can hear it just adds a little bit of the glassiness to it.
But we're running out of time.
Really great. Jesse likes having a little bit of the slap on his voice, so here's that. And I have the diffusion off on this because I want that slap there immediately to give his vocal depth. That's part of something that he uses and sings into, so it's there. So here's this.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time.
Boom. And I have the width all the way down, so I'm monoing that so his vocal stays focused and in the middle. De-esser. De-essing.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
Bingo. A little bit of vocal EQ. What do we got? Bringing out just a little bit of mid-range. A little bit of air that we took out from here. I found that for me, sometimes it's helpful to darken something a little bit and then bring the air back in that I took out. Very similarly how on drums, or I'll do this on bass, where I will amplify a frequency outside of the range that I'm using and then use a high pass to bring that low end up to control that. I'm doing the exact same thing with the high end. I'm low passing it here, so that gives me a little more wiggle room to bring this up. So if we don't have this, move these. So if we don't have this here and I bring in, first let's hear this and then I'll show you the difference.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
Then this.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
Hear how that just added a little bit of edge to his voice? Now, if I were just to brighten it up without adding that weight and cutting the high end out, then we're going to start getting bitey.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
Hear how thin his voice sounds now?
Don't want to give up, my dear.
There. Small movements along the way to help us dial in that sound. And then tape with a low boost, we're bringing up a little bit more body again. Again.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
And then with it on.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
And I chose this tape formula. I auditioned them all, and I chose this tape formula because depending on the tape formula, the high end changes. And that I found that really helpful. And then by using that volume max, there is some power supply hum of 120. So I have a notch at 60 and then the octave 120 to take that out.
Don't want to give up, my dear.
There we go. And then over the entire vocal, I've got compression, limiting, one more batch of trying to remove that hum just to make sure it's not there, and then Neve bus. So let's bring them all out and bring them all in.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time. Future isn't quite so clear, leaving ourselves behind.
And that, I'm driving this just a little bit, so we're seeing a little bit of a volume bump. I use this to bring it up. I'm saying, what do we have here? Negative 1.9. So it sounded brighter, mainly because we have just a little bit of a volume bump. But let's hear the difference. I tried to level it out a little bit.
Future isn't quite so clear. Future isn't quite so clear.
They're pretty close. But just driving that a little bit, we're getting the sound of that circuit in there. It sounds incredible. And yeah, just straight. That's it. So let's listen to this.
Don't want to give up, my dear, but we're running out of time. Future isn't quite so clear, leaving ourselves behind.
Alright, I'm going to start driving the console so you can hear it.
Never does come easy, baby. You help me and I help you. Keep on walking on that line till we see this through. We gotta try, but ain't too late. I can't just get by. Oh, we can't wait. It ain't never too late. Hey.
It can be a little deceiving because the volume change. But if we were to take some time and really mess with it, but you can hear how the guitars start to come out a little bit, and then the drums tuck down, and then like the cymbals kind of come out. It's really neat, and so that's something that I've been messing with lately. Is there was one session specifically. I was working on my brother's record, and it was an accident, and I really had the output super loud, and the sound was like, I was like, why does this sound so different? And I realized I was pushing my board super hard, and it ended up working in my favor. And I was like, man, I didn't realize that how much of a change that made. And so then I've just started using that. You hear people talk about, transformer saturation, all that good stuff. So bada boom. Yeah, it was really cool to see that. So I'm going to bring up, because I did, master this, this record. I'm going to show you how I did some things here. Let me find the folder. Where did I put it? Let's do. Oh, I think I have it under a different file name. Hold on. One of the things was for mastering for vinyl was something that the thing I found is there's not much information online about like how you treat the master for vinyl. And so then I found one article where someone was talking about some things, and that I found that to be helpful to get me on the way of being like, okay, why do, I was listening to some records with my uncle, like Blue Oyster Cult, Foghat, and I remember bringing my band Tiny Tree the record over to play on his record player. He was in the service, so he has a super badass Kenwood stereo system, and so everything just sounds absolutely amazing through it. And when I put Tiny Tree's record Embolism on, we had somebody else master it, but I just remember being so disappointed at how it sounded. It had no body to it. Like, it was big, but it was crunchy, had no dynamics. And, a lot of that's on me because I didn't have the knowledge I have now for mixing. But like the thing I took away from that is I need to make sure that the dynamics of the record stay intact, and I use that to really get the master to sound right. All right, so you can see this is the master session. And these are different mix versions that we had along the way. This record didn't take me long to mix at all because we just tracked everything really well and it sounded great. So let me see how I routed this. Let's see, send to track 4. Track 4. 25, 26. So it looks like I recorded this back through my board. And I can tell that this is for the vinyl master because I have a de-esser on there. The reason for a de-esser is to grab any stray harshness between sibilance or cymbal, because those things can make the groove weird to where it can actually kick the needle out of the groove. So we want to catch any stray or cymbals, things like that. So I just kind of have this gently working to catch strays. And then I love this plugin a lot. And I remember specifically the first time I did Jesse's record, this one was great for his vocals. So I'm driving it a little bit and then softening the output. What I've learned with mastering is like really bold moves can get you into hot water really fast. And so I've learned to make very gentle moves and start with either the limiter or compressor first, and then do all your movements into it. Typically, if I'm mixing something, I really prefer not to master it just because I'm too close. And but this was I worked out a deal with these guys that I was going to just do everything. So I did, which is fine. It's cool, but I really prefer to send it out to another mastering engineer when they're hearing it for the first time and hearing it on their system with all their mastering specific pieces of equipment. All they do is master. It just makes more sense to have someone that's dedicated their life to mastering music master. But over the years, I've done it for myself. So I've picked up some things along the way, and then actually hearing them all the way through completion to either digital release or press to vinyl, then my confidence is where it's just like I know I can deliver something that's going to translate effectively. This is for his vocal back on, so we got 1.8K. I'm just bringing that forward just a little bit because I want his vocals to stay nice and sweet. And I remember this one the last time I did their previous record. I remember this EQ specifically, so I just went right back to it because it was great. I'm using the Iron. I love this compressor. I'm not doing any equalization here, and then I'm just kind of finagling the mix. Let me see if I can. Let me not get off track. And then I only have this on here just in case there's any strays. I think I brought the volume up just a little bit, but I'm not limiting it. This is only to grab anything that would jump out. I'm thinking about the physical cutting of the record. There was a time in my life where I had a mono vinyl lathe made by RecoCut, and I was actually cutting records. I was cutting lacquers, and I was cutting straight to PVC. And when I was cutting records, I actually got to learn how the frequency and intensity of the material dictated the cut that actually went into the plastic or the lacquer or acetate. I'm not super up on the terminology. I was primarily cutting into plastic or PVC with a diamond tip needle. But I got to see how this stuff actually got to, what happened once it was actually cut into the material. And then I just have a meter for monitoring my levels. So I think, let's see here. See from track 4. I may not have done this through the console. But so what I do is I send the mix into this track, and I send this track into this, and I record the output of this. So we got 2 laid over here, and we can listen to the processing that I did for the song. Oh, we got to monitor that output. Oh, it's muted. Duh. Okay. Mix 4. Solo.
My dear, but we're running out of time. Future ain't quite so clear. Leaving ourselves behind. It never does come easy, baby. You help me and I help you. Keep walking on that line.
Yeah, so you can kind of hear, what I did there. And then, I forgot to point out the other thing that's important with vinyl is monoing the low frequency information. So 135 is where I'm high passing. So everything below 135 is mono. That helps with the cut on the record. When that bass is too big, the groove gets a lot larger. There's pictures all over the internet where you actually see people that zoom in on the groove with a microscope, and you can see how that changes. And then I've watched interviews with, lacquer cutting engineers, or cutting engineers, where they talk about, on some music, like maybe electronic music, where you get stereo bass, and it makes it really challenging to cut that. So by monoing the low end, it's going to keep it very tight and focused. So that cut's going to turn out better. And the person that's actually readying the material to cut it is going to have to do less or nothing at all. The last piece of the puzzle is I mastered their last record, so I got to hear how that sounded once it was cut and pressed. So when I listened to it, then I got to hear okay, this is all great. The dynamic energy is great. The snare drum still has a nice snap to it. Cymbals are very big. The vocal is nice and warm and intimate. One of the things I think about when I'm cutting or readying material for vinyl, I treat it sometimes almost just a little bit differently than when I do for a digital release, because when I'm thinking, if someone's listening to vinyl, they're taking the time to pay attention to what they're listening to. So, like when I mastered the last JRCC record, which is their self-titled, I closed my eyes and I was listening, and I wanted Jesse's vocal to really grab me and bring me in. I wanted it to be a very intimate experience. So like between the mix, I wanted to make sure that when I did the master, especially for vinyl, I wanted it to be extra special. So when people listen to the vinyl, the drums are very exciting. When you don't have a limiter on, that dynamic energy is way more exciting. Sometimes I feel like making equalization moves and things like that is almost in a defensive reaction for the limiter. You can see this is the limited mix, which I'm pretty sure I bounced that through my console back in to get it a little bit louder and bring that guitar out more. And then so that would be right here. So this would be the digital master. I don't know what I did for that. I may have kept these, and I think I may have toggled this to find the sweet spot. Either that or I used a Pultec to drive the output, but this is the digital master completed.
My dear, but we're running out of time. Future quite so clear, leaving ourselves behind. It never does come easy, baby. You help me and I help you. Keep on walking on that line till we see this through. We gotta try but it ain't too late. Can't just get by. Oh, we can't wait. It ain't never too late. Hey.
Yeah, in a gentle song like this, like hammering the limiter, just in my mind makes absolutely no sense. We want to keep this song with the same feel. When have something gentle like that, I feel like it'd be an irresponsible move for me to make this thing super loud and intense. I need to follow the sound and feel of this song. So having it be gentle, to have those dynamics intact, to make sure it feels right. Music is art in it. There's emotion coming from the artist, and then us as a listener receive that, and we cut that with all of our life experiences and we react to it. And so it is, in my opinion, very, very important to make sure that the material is represented in a way that we as the listener can latch onto it and feel something. So that's something that over the years, I remember I was doing one record and I felt myself focusing less on the tones but more on the feel, and that was kind of a turning point for me as an engineer, where once I did that record, I felt like my record's following started improving more and more and more and more and more, where it's like if I get the feel right, the sound will follow. I watched an interview with somebody that said, How do you fix a crappy snare drum sound? Write a better song. There's a lot of truth in that. You'll find yourself getting stuck less on the way things sound if the song feels right. You're not going to be like, oh man, there's too much ring in that snare, or the cymbals are a little crunchy, or the kick drum needs a little more pillowiness to it. Like those things come together when the feel is right. And when the players are great and can translate that feeling effectively, then it makes our job as an engineer and mixer, makes it so much easier, to where it's like all we have to do is just make sure that that's, tight and clean and clear and focused, or, a little bit dirty. So, follow those things. And that's how I know when a mix is done. I never find myself going into tweak mode. I arrive at a finished product pretty quickly. It's just like nothing bothers me. Everything feels right. Done. If I can turn it up and I find myself bobbing my head or catching a vibe or smiling or something, I was like, done. Like, I don't overthink it and just trust my instincts. It's like, if I'm feeling good when I'm listening to this, then so is everyone else. And then the tones will follow. Same thing with tracking. It comes with doing it lots and lots and lots and lots. I've done lots of records. This year I'm up to, I've done 11 records in 2023. And it's been so beneficial for me as an engineer to have records like, every few weeks I'm doing another one, or it's just like last week I had a record, this week I have a record. When I have them closer together, then now I'm everything's fresh in my head. I was like, this worked really well last week. How can I improve on that? What was really good about this? Finding all those little things, mic position, mics, all of those things, which mic pre did I use on that? It's like I used channel 11 on snare drum for tracking Best Noodles in Town. That's not transformer coupled. So I'm probably going to use track 11 again for snare drum. Like, that sounded great. So it's like, I used to use channels 9 and 10 on overheads. They sounded awesome. On my console, those are not transformer coupled. So I will find myself repeating things, being like, okay, that turned out really great. What am I going to try next? And then I typically use, when I track my own band, Tiny Tree, I will start experimenting on my own stuff because, we're not paying ourselves. We do everything ourselves. I record all the music. Paul handles all the artwork and marketing. So I find myself making bolder decisions on Tiny Tree because I know I can backpedal out of it. But if someone's coming in and hiring me for a job, then I want to make sure that I'm capturing it, right quicker, knowing that I'm going to arrive at this sound immediately. That's like, this is a great starting point. And then we can make, tweaks from there. Doing so many records on shoestring budgets, I learned how to work quickly, learn how to leave myself breadcrumbs if I needed to for later, like on heavy records. It's like, okay, this guitar tone sounds great now, but what happens when I get into mixing and it's just not quite right? Well, I pulled a DI on the guitar, now I can reamp. Same thing with drums, having sample libraries, being like, oh man, that kick drum is super close, but it's just like, I need something a little bit more of this. Now I can pull in a sample to get me where I need to go. Same thing on snares, toms. I don't think outside of a tongue cutter session, sampled a cymbal just to reinforce something. I'll sample a cymbal and flip it in reverse for production value stuff. But outside of that, like, there's so many things where it's like the vibe you have when you're tracking is one thing, and then when you're mixing, you're actually hearing everything. There can be a change where it's just like, oh man, we were really excited about this, but this is actually kind of sloppy in the sound. Sometimes that can work in our favor. When I was talking earlier about don't forget the tracking sound, because there's a lot of good in that. There's a record I did with a band called Short Haired Domestics, and we did a crazy bass sound. And, I was mixing and I started to drift away from the crazy bass sound, and I found myself being really unhappy with the bass. And so I just undid everything I did, went back to the original bass sound. I was like, you know what? The original bass sound was perfect. Why did I deviate from this path that we were all excited about when we were tracking? And it happens to me all the time where I lose focus, getting excited about all the cool plugins I have. It's like, oh, I can make this sound. Oh, I can make this sound. But then I get myself off on, way off base. And then it's like, if I just come back to, there's a reason I landed on those decisions in the moment, and to not deviate from those things, because there is good in those sounds, and to play into those sounds. Sometimes when I get done recording a band, I love to send just the tracking mix to the band so they can at least hear what they did. So while I mix it, and sometimes the tracking mix I have is really close to where it should be. I had a band that I worked with where, the tracking mix, they loved almost everything about it, but there were things in there that drove me nuts. And so I remember having a conversation with the guitar player singer and talking about where I was at, where he was at, and it turns out we were really close on a lot of things. He and I have very similar visions. We love a lot of the same artists, love a lot of the same records and producers, and I was able to share where I was at in my vision. He was able to share where he was at in his vision, and it ended up being we were almost in the exact same place. The decisions I made were just too bold. And sometimes I find myself, when I do a first mix, I swing for the fences. I'm like, yeah, doing this, and it's tons of this, and I made this guitar crazy, and I get all excited, and I start chasing the feeling. I'm like, this is nuts. And then I send it to the band, and they're like, your idea's in the right spot, but it's too much. And my brother can attest to this, because he's been with me from day one when we started recording with a Tascam Porta Studio 2 and a realistic microphone that we found in a bin somewhere. And we started figuring stuff out together, where it's just like I started making crazy moves. That person still lives inside me. So yeah, I could talk for hours about this, but these growing through all those things is what makes you who you are as an engineer or producer. Dave Pensato said it best. He's just like, people hire you for your taste, and there's so much truth in that, to where if a band chooses me to record and mix their record, like, they're hiring me for my taste. They either like records I've done before, which is typically what draws people in to work with me, or like my process, my personality. I have a lot of fun doing this. Every time I do a band from the ground up, it's like Christmas every single time. I get so excited to hear these sounds, and it's genuine joy, because I love doing this so much, where it's like all those things play into who you are as an identity, as an engineer producer. And it's exciting for the band. Some of the things I like to do for miking up a drum set, it's fun for me, and it's also fun for the person playing. Like, oh man, do you see that crazy thing you did to my drums? And I'm like, do you hear that crazy sound? It's like, yeah, it's this microphone. This is what we did to it. Like when I did Funeral Noise record, we stuck a microphone in my dryer. And it's just like, we got to have a microphone in there. And it's like, so we did it. We stuck a microphone in the dryer. And I had to tell my wife, hey, there's a microphone in the dryer. Don't turn the dryer on if, the mic stays in there overnight, and it's, those things that we grow and we learn from, and you take the things that are good, and then you fine tune those things, and the things that are crazy, you just learn how to balance it out. So yeah, Jesse Ray and the Carolina Catfish. I'll leave some links to where you can buy their music. They have a record coming out. So yeah, check it out.
We gotta try